Have you ever wondered why the test on your life felt so personal, so relentless, like heaven itself had its eyes on you while the world just watched you burn? Because what if it did? What if the reason you've been feeling like the outlier, the misfit, the over-targeted, over-tested and under-acknowledged one is because you were never in training for ordinary life? You were in preparation for something holy, something heavy, something only the truly chosen are trusted to carry. You didn't click on this video because you were bored. This isn't background noise. This is spiritual alignment. Something ancient inside you has been calling for confirmation, and this is it. This is not just a message. It's a mirror, a remembering, a revelation. God's chosen ones, He gave you the hardest exam, and you passed without cheating. Let that land for a second. You didn't manipulate. You didn't mimic. You didn't lie to look strong. You bled in private and still showed up in truth. While others were chasing platforms, you were surviving furnaces. While others were faking favor, you were forging faith. If your soul just whispered, "That's me," type 777 in the comments. That number isn't hype, it's heaven's code. It marks those who passed what most people never even saw coming. And before we go deeper, I want to pause and thank every one of you who's been supporting this space through Super Thanks. Your seed is not just generosity, it's fuel for prophetic reach. Your faith helps this message travel into the hands and hearts that need it most. Now, lean in. What if the pressure you thought was punishment was actually the proof that you're one of His most trusted? Let's talk about it. God's chosen ones. God gave you the hardest exam, and you passed without cheating. Let's speak plainly, because what you endured was not just hardship, it was divine filtration. You weren't walking through a chapter, you were being evaluated by eternity itself. This wasn't an exam with a paper and pen, but a soul test, one that studied your character in silence, your decisions in pressure, and your endurance in isolation. You didn't get a syllabus. There were no guidelines. The questions came dressed as losses, delays, betrayals, and long stretches of holy silence. It was the kind of test heaven only gives to the rare ones, those chosen not for their perfection, but for their resilience. Have you ever wondered why your storms came without warning, while others seemed to cruise through life with ease? Why your pain carried layers even you couldn't name? Why every door you knocked on felt like it had been locked from the inside? It wasn't punishment, it was placement. Like Joseph in Genesis 37-50, thrown into a pit by his brothers, falsely accused in Potiphar's house, left forgotten in a prison. Yet all along God was watching. Not to see him break, but to confirm that his heart would remain steady when no reward was in sight. The Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love. Genesis 39:21. And the Lord has been with you too, even in the silence. The thing about these divine exams is that they study your frequency, not just your function. They listen to your heart when no one's listening to your voice. They measure your ability to still believe when evidence disappears. And you passed, not because you figured everything out, but because you didn't compromise. You didn't cheat the process. You didn't take shortcuts. Like Job, who in the depths of his despair still declared, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him." Job 13:15. You held your ground in the unseen. The world may never know the complexity of what you carried, but heaven counted every tear like architecture counts every stress point in a bridge. Your load wasn't random, it was calibration. You were being tested not just for strength, but for sustainability. Can you still be kind when you're misunderstood? Can you still be holy when you're alone? Can you still bless when no one sees your brokenness? Ruth. She chose loyalty over convenience, following Naomi into a land she did not know. She could have turned back like Orpah, but Ruth pressed forward, and in doing so, aligned herself with divine destiny. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Ruth 1:16. You too stayed when you could have left. You believed when doubt had a louder voice. That's not survival, that's spiritual excellence. Nature endures its own tests, how a tree bends but doesn't break in storms, how the lion waits in stillness before it pounces. You were both the tree and the lion. You practiced patience as a weapon and discernment as your compass. While others cracked under pressure, you recalibrated. That's rare. That's royal. And while you were walking through fire, someone else took a different path. Charles Ponzi, once a businessman who dazzled the public with promises of quick returns, chose deceit over integrity. He built a name, yes, but on deception. And like all structures built on fraud, it collapsed. Not because he lacked talent, but because he cheated the test. His name is now synonymous with betrayal. But you walked through without scheming, without manipulation, and without shortcuts. On the other side of the spectrum, Sister Claire, a trauma counselor from a war-torn region who lost her family and still stayed to serve orphans. She said once, "God didn't save me to escape the pain. He trusted me to stay and heal others with it." That is the kind of strength the world overlooks, but heaven exalts. Have you noticed how certain birds fly alone when migrating long distances? Like the osprey, strong, solitary, instinctual. They don't travel with the crowd because their path is built for a different altitude. You, chosen one, have always felt this difference. It's not a flaw, it's a mark. You weren't built for comfort. You were sculpted for trust. And now, the trust God placed in you is shifting into movement. How do you explain the peace you feel now, even when the noise hasn't stopped? Why do people look at you and sense a weight they can't name? Why do rooms change when you enter them, even when you stay quiet? Because you passed. And the evidence isn't just your survival. It's your still soft heart. It's your still sharp discernment. It's your still anchored faith. This light momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. 2 Corinthians 4:17. That affliction was your curriculum, and now glory is the diploma. Quiet glory, eternal weight. And when people ask, "How did you make it through?" what will you say? Not with bitterness, not with boasting, but with the quiet clarity of one who was seen by God the whole time. You didn't just survive. You passed. You passed the kind of test that doesn't come with a finish line or a trophy, the kind that doesn't get celebrated because most never even recognize it was a test to begin with. You passed without cheating, without posturing, without becoming someone else just to make the pain stop. You stayed honest in a world that rewards the mask. You stayed kind in a season where cruelty would have been easier. That's what heaven sees, even when no one else claps. And here's what most never understand. This wasn't a public trial. There were no loud enemies, no grand betrayals with witnesses to validate your hurt. This was the kind of test that shows up in slow heartbreak, unanswered prayers, years of inattention, and the kind of silence that makes you question your worth. You kept going even when the days blurred, when your hope was exhausted, and when the only voice speaking into your soul was the faint whisper of God saying, "Don't give up." Why do some quit when the silence grows thick? Why do others compromise, abandon their principles, or numb out when life doesn't hand out explanations? It's not because they're lesser. It's because this test wasn't for everyone. It was for the few who were chosen, not to be perfect, but to be trusted with pain that purifies. You're still standing because you became a living answer to a question only God was asking. Can you keep your heart clean when no one's watching? Can you protect your integrity when it would be easier to let it go? Can you still give love when you're not receiving it in return? Jesus said in Luke 16:10, "Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much." That's you, trusted in obscurity, trusted in silence, trusted when it cost you more than anyone will ever understand. You weren't just being tested, you were being entrusted. With what? With weight, with wisdom, with depth, with discernment, with compassion that only those who've been through fire ever carry. Have you noticed something shifting lately? A steadiness in your voice, a clarity in your decisions, a gentleness that no longer feels like weakness. That's not personality. That's spiritual graduation. That's divine endorsement. You passed not by being loud, but by being loyal. Loyal to your values, loyal to your calling, loyal to a God who never left, even when it felt like he did. You are like the olive tree. In ancient Israel, its oil was produced only through crushing, slow, sustained pressure. But once released, that oil anointed kings, healed wounds, lit lamps in the darkest night. What you've carried privately is now becoming oil publicly. The pressure was never random. The crushing was never punishment. It was production for something greater. And while you were quietly enduring, someone else took the shortcut. Lou Pearlman, the flashy music mogul who built empires through lies, deceiving artists and investors alike. He looked like he was passing every test until the fraud collapsed. His success was real, but it wasn't rooted. You, on the other hand, are rooted like the cedar of Lebanon, slow to grow, impossible to shake. Now, think of Farida, a midwife in a war zone. She has no stage, no title, no acclaim, but night after night she stays, delivering children under the threat of bombs and despair. Her exam wasn't given in a boardroom, it was given in blood and courage. No headlines, but heaven knows her name. And maybe in some way your story sounds like hers. There's no more pretending that your softness is a flaw. You carry steel underneath that grace. You've been hardened not by bitterness, but by fire that sanctifies. That's why your spirit feels cleaner now, lighter, because you passed with your soul intact. The testing of your faith produces perseverance. James 1:3 reminds us. And perseverance is what qualified you for what's next. You didn't skip steps, you built strength, you built substance, and now you're about to move from hidden to heralded, not for fame, but for fulfillment. Just like Brian Stevenson, a public interest lawyer and founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, who stood quietly but firmly in the face of injustice for decades. He didn't rise through anger or theatrics. He rose through moral clarity, through relentless compassion for those forgotten by the system. His test came in courtrooms where the odds were stacked, in prison visits where hope was almost extinct, and he passed, without bitterness, without shortcuts. "Each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done," he once said. That's the heart of someone trusted with sacred burdens. Contrast that with Adam Neumann, the charismatic founder of WeWork, whose vision of community and innovation began to blur into delusion and manipulation. He sold a dream, but when the pressure mounted, it revealed cracks in the foundation. His fall wasn't because the vision was flawed, but because the ego behind it wasn't rooted in accountability. That's what happens when the test becomes about image, not integrity. When charisma replaces character, that's the difference heaven watches for. When the fire comes, will your foundation hold? When applause fades, will your choices still echo righteousness? This is the question you've already answered with your life. What kind of person keeps walking through a desert where others collapse? What kind of soul keeps giving when it's never guaranteed to receive? Only the rare ones, only the chosen, only those who realize the test is part of the anointing. You didn't skip steps, you built strength, you built substance, and now you're about to move from hidden to heralded, not for fame, but for fulfillment. And when the question comes again, how did you survive all that? You'll simply smile, because what you went through wasn't survival. It was sanctification, and what you carry now, that's legacy. You know what made it harder? No one saw the test. This wasn't the kind of suffering people rally around. It wasn't the dramatic kind that earns sympathy or social solidarity. No, this was the silent kind, invisible, sacred. It came dressed in delays that had no logic. Disappointments that didn't even make the news of your own life. Losses so quiet you were the only one who ever grieved them. And then there were the internal battles, the kind that never left a bruise on your skin but shattered everything inside you like a cathedral of stained glass collapsing in the dark. How do you explain that kind of pain? How do you tell someone you're exhausted from carrying what they can't even name? This was the test, the kind heaven gives only to those it knows won't cheat, because cheating would have meant closing your heart, turning bitter, shutting down, becoming numb, but instead, you kept feeling, you kept hoping, you kept praying, even when it felt like the prayers were hitting a brass ceiling. You were like the tree in winter. No one saw the roots growing deeper, only that the leaves were gone. But in the unseen underground places, your foundation was expanding. That's spiritual architecture. That's what the prophets walked through, unseen preparation before public revelation. Think of Job. When everything was stripped from him, family, fortune, health, he didn't curse God, even though he was provoked to. Though he slay me, yet will I hope in him. Job 13:15. That wasn't blind optimism. That was covenant faith, the kind forged in fire. And this, chosen one, is what you've been proving. You didn't collapse when comfort left. You didn't sell your integrity for ease. You stayed in alignment when it cost you company. You passed the hardest exam, not because you had all the answers, but because you chose not to abandon the truth inside you. Even when the room went quiet, even when they misjudged your silence, even when life made no sense at all. And that, according to heaven, is what qualifies you. There's a kind of strength you now carry that can't be imitated. It doesn't sparkle under spotlights. It doesn't parade itself in titles or positions. It's subtle but seismic, like tectonic plates shifting beneath the surface. It's what makes rooms shift when you enter, even if you say nothing. You're not louder now. You're deeper. You're not faster. You're more exact. Because you've passed the test that most never even realize they're in. Let's pause here. Why do some people collapse under pressure while others rise? The answer lies not in talent, not even in resilience, but in reverence. And that's what you cultivated in secret. Reverence for what was unseen. Reverence for timing. Reverence for a God who trusted you with the kind of pain that rewrites a soul. Remember when Jesus was led into the wilderness by the Spirit? Matthew 4:1. Not by the enemy, not by error, by the Spirit. For 40 days he was tested, not to prove his weakness, but to reveal his assignment. You too were led into that quiet place, not to be punished, but to be proven. And like Jesus, you didn't cheat, you didn't cut corners, you didn't turn stones into bread just to satisfy your hunger for validation. You waited, you trusted, you passed. In the real world, look at Yo-Yo Ma, a world-renowned cellist. He didn't take shortcuts to fame. He practiced in quiet for years, often unseen and under pressure to conform. But he stayed committed to a deeper beauty. His artistry today is not flashy, it's holy. It's the result of spiritual consistency, not spotlight strategy. Now, contrast that with Carlos Ghosn, the former automotive executive who was once lauded as a genius in global business transformation. He manipulated accounting systems and misused company funds to inflate his image. When the system caught up, his empire collapsed and he fled justice in disgrace. The fallout wasn't just legal, it was moral. His shortcuts cost him credibility, legacy, and peace. But the deepest example may come from those who never enter the spotlight. Take Lena, a single mother in her 40s, who worked 3 jobs while battling depression in silence. She showed up for her children every day, cooked, prayed, stayed soft. When offered hush money at work to ignore abuse in her department, she refused. She lost her job, but kept her soul. Years later, the truth surfaced and she was reinstated in a new leadership position, not because she campaigned, but because her character had become a witness. That's what passing without cheating looks like. You've grown through silence, pressure, absence, and fire. Like volcanic rock forged under invisible heat, your structure is different, stronger, stable, ready. You're not the same as before. You're not even close. You've passed the hardest exam by walking in reverence when no one clapped, by choosing truth when lies were louder, by staying soft when it would have been easier to shut down. That's what makes you rare. That's what makes you ready. But have you ever paused to ask, who would you have become if you had broken instead of bowed? And now the wind is shifting. For promotion comes neither from the east, nor from the west, nor from the south. But God is the judge. He puts down one and exalts another. Psalm 75, 6-7. Because God doesn't just test for sport, He tests for stewardship. And now He knows He can entrust you with more. Because you didn't take the shortcut, you passed without cheating. And that means what's next will match what's inside. That's the hidden truth about the kind of exams heaven gives. They're not written in ink or scored with numbers. They're spiritual calibrations, frequency tests that don't measure how loud you can speak, but how true your spirit stays under pressure. You felt it, didn't you? The silence, the unbearable quiet that follows a desperate prayer. You asked God, "Why is this happening to me?" And the heavens responded with stillness. But that stillness was not neglect. It was divine observation. Because as in every true examination, the teacher stays silent during the test. The refining pot is for silver and the furnace for gold, but the Lord tests the hearts. Proverbs 17:3. You weren't being punished. You were being examined, not for failure, but for foundation. Some trials come loud with chaos and noise, but yours was cellular. It stretched your character on the inside, leaving no physical bruise but bruising everything inside you. Your hope, your patience, your sense of clarity. But still, you did not collapse. And that's why heaven watched. This is the essence of being chosen. It's not that you avoided pain, but that you allowed it to refine you instead of deform you. You didn't just carry your cross, you carried it in silence with clean hands and a soft heart. Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life. James 1:12. That's what God saw. Not performance, perseverance. You didn't fold when you could have manipulated. You didn't sell your soul for temporary safety. You didn't trade your empathy for armor. That is what separates you from those who cheat the system. Not because you were more righteous, but because you chose revelation over reaction. Why is that so rare? Because most people try to force closure, but you sat in uncertainty like a sculptor sits with stone. You let time and pressure carve you into someone with emotional fidelity. And even when the fog didn't lift, you chose not to fake the light. We saw this mirrored in the story of Job, a man stripped of everything, children, wealth, health. Yet even in silence he declared, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him." Job 13:15. That's the soul of the chosen. Not blind optimism, but resilient surrender. Like an ancient oak tree holding ground in a lightning storm, roots deep, trunk still, branches shaking but never breaking. You didn't retaliate when others projected. You didn't fight dirty when accused unjustly. You didn't invent stories to get ahead. And that's what heaven was waiting for. The eyes of the Lord search the whole earth in order to strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed to him. 2 Chronicles 16:9. The quiet strength of Fred Rogers, yes, Mr. Rogers, TV personality and ordained minister. Known for his soft-spoken nature, he faced decades of criticism for being too gentle in a loud world. But he never wavered. And when the US Senate tried to defund educational broadcasting in 1969, it was his soft, unwavering conviction, not outrage, that turned the tide. That spiritual steel hidden in velvet. In contrast, remember Enron CEO Jeffrey Skilling, a man who manipulated books, inflated earnings, and led thousands into ruin. His downfall was swift, and his legacy is not power, but collapse. What's built on deceit cannot withstand the winds of divine scrutiny. And then there are the stories no one hears. Like Eniola, a single mother in Lagos who walked an hour each day to clean homes, refusing to steal or compromise. One client noticed her consistency and offered to sponsor her education. Years later, she opened her own training institute for women. No headline, just harvest. You've been like the whale, silent in the depths, rising when no one expects it. Or like the foxglove, a flower that blooms only after surviving frost. Poised, brilliant, and toxic only to those who try to consume it improperly. And this too is written, for we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet without sin. Hebrews 4:15. Even Jesus passed his test in the wilderness with no audience, no claps, just resistance, presence, and truth. So if you're standing here now, still soft, still open, still honest, you've passed. Not because you got everything right, but because you stayed real. Not because you were perfect, but because you didn't cheat. You didn't force what God had hidden. You didn't betray your own soul to escape the fire. If you passed this much in the dark, what happens when heaven finally turns the light on you? You showed up, even when you didn't recognize your own reflection. You stayed planted, even when nothing around you was blooming. The ground looked dry, the sky withheld rain, and yet you held on like a lone cypress in a windless valley. Deep roots, silent faith. The people around you didn't see the fire. They didn't feel the ashes on your skin or the smoke in your lungs. But you walked through it anyway, without fanfare, without rescue. You endured in a way that left no headline, just legacy. And now you carry something that can't be explained, a quiet authority, a spiritual gravity, the kind of presence that makes people pause mid-sentence, not because of fear, but reverence. They don't know what it is, but they know it's not ordinary. It's the resonance of heaven that hums at a different frequency through you. You don't command attention with volume. You command alignment with stillness. It's not pride, it's power, the kind that only those who've walked alone with God can bear. This is what happens when you pass the hardest exams, the kind God gives in wilderness seasons. This is what David carried after years hiding in caves, still refusing to kill Saul, even when he had the chance. The Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed. 1 Samuel 24:6. That wasn't fear, that was discernment, that was spiritual restraint, and God remembered it. You're not loud, you're not always first, but you are consistent. Like the pulse in a wrist or the tide on a moonless night, your presence realigns things. And whether they realize it or not, people look to you when the room starts shaking. Can you feel it now? That shift in how people respond to you. They sense the stability, the inner architecture of someone who has been rebuilt from rubble, brick by sacred brick. Not with human blueprints, but divine ones. Unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. Psalm 127:1. And not everyone can take it. because what you carry is clarifying. Some feel exposed around you, not because you judge, but because your peace makes their chaos uncomfortable. That's what happens when light enters a dim room. Like lanternfish in the ocean depths that emit light without heat, your illumination doesn't burn, but it does reveal. And revelation is not always welcomed. Look at the late Chadwick Boseman. He carried illness, pain, and silence, but still gave the world stories that echoed dignity and strength. He never had to announce his battle. His light did. That's how real power moves, without needing to explain itself. In contrast, Martin Shkreli, the former pharmaceutical executive who became infamous for raising the price of a life-saving drug by more than 5,000%, once viewed as a young, ambitious figure in biotech finance, his decisions reflected not innovation, but exploitation. He was eventually convicted for securities fraud and sentenced to prison. His name is now a cautionary tale. When stewardship is replaced with self-interest, even brilliance can rot into infamy. Then there's Nara, a bakery worker from a small coastal town. Every morning at 4 a.m., she kneads bread while whispering prayers for each person who'll eat it. Customers say they feel comfort in her pastries, though they don't know why. That's presence. That's what it looks like when someone carries grace baked into their hands. You walk like that now. Maybe you don't see it yet, but the room feels it, because what you carry is not from this world. It was forged in silence, in testing, in tears, and it's not going away. You've become a sacred disturbance in a world addicted to appearances. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. Isaiah 61. This isn't a temporary glow. This is a mantle, and you're wearing it without saying a word, because the ones who've passed the exam, without cheating, without shortcuts, don't have to prove anything. Would you recognize your own light now if you saw it in someone else? Because you were given the hardest exam and you passed in silence. And now something is shifting. The ground beneath you may still feel quiet, but listen closely. The silence is different now. It's not the kind of silence that tests your faith. It's the kind that precedes revelation. You've crossed a threshold. Not everyone sees it. Not everyone needs to, but heaven saw your paper, and it was marked with favor. Like the stillness before dawn, something luminous is being arranged. Heaven doesn't reward noise. Heaven responds to endurance. While others ran ahead with clamor, you remained rooted in the storm, learning the language of trust. Now God is speaking back, in alignment, in clarity, in doors that open without you having to knock. What once felt like delay now reveals itself as design. Remember how David was left tending sheep when the prophet came to anoint a king. No one thought to call him in, but God did. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. 1 Samuel 16:7. Like David, you weren't just overlooked, you were being prepared. And like Joseph, thrown into a pit for his dreams, you were tested in private before ever stepping into public responsibility. Until the time that his word came to pass, the word of the Lord tested him. Psalm 105, verse 19. Have you ever wondered why certain people couldn't walk with you through this season? Why even the closest ones couldn't understand what you were enduring? It's because the exam wasn't theirs to take, and the revelation isn't theirs to carry. God gave you the burden because he also gave you the capacity, and the reward is not applause, it's divine access. Look at Natsuko, a widow in a quiet Japanese coastal town who raised 3 children working 2 jobs without ever speaking of her sacrifices. Years later, when her youngest became a physician and returned to build a community clinic in her name, she simply smiled. She didn't need to explain the cost of her choices. Her legacy spoke for her. Now contrast that with Ray Dalker, a former tech entrepreneur who built his company on hype, borrowed brilliance, and stolen ideas. When the investors came calling and the foundation collapsed, it was exposed that he never passed the test. He just skipped class. What took a decade to build vanished in a month because illusion has no root system. And your roots? They've gone deep. You are like the mycelium beneath the forest floor, unseen yet essential, carrying unseen wisdom that keeps ecosystems alive. You are like the ox that plows in silence while others strut and shout, slow, strong, and unstoppable. You are the one whose growth confused those who only understand spectacle, not substance. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. Psalm 34:18. You didn't just survive heartbreak, you transformed in it. You didn't just wait for deliverance, you became the vessel that carried it. That's why the frequency you emit now is different. It doesn't beg for attention, it resonates. It rearranges atmospheres. Those who sow in tears shall reap with shouts of joy. Psalm 126 verse 5. Do you feel it now? The harvest hum beneath your feet. That's not adrenaline, that's alignment. Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him. James 1:12. So when the light hits you now, don't flinch. You're not being exposed, you're being recognized. You see, most people look for evidence of progress in obvious places, paychecks, promotions, praise. But the most powerful promotions happen in rooms you never enter, in conversations where your name was whispered by someone whose life you impacted in silence, in moments when your absence revealed more than your presence ever could. You didn't climb a ladder, you became one. You became a structure others could stand on. You became a bridge between endurance and elevation. Because when you pass a divine exam, you don't just get a reward, you become the proof. You become the evidence of what obedience in the dark can create. You are what faith looks like when it refuses to fold. And now that quiet faith is starting to speak. It doesn't shout, it settles into the room like gravity. You don't need to say much. People are already sensing the shift. They don't know what it is, but something about you feels different. More grounded, more clear, like someone who knows. The righteous will never be shaken. They will be remembered forever. Psalm 112, verse 6. You've become like a deep-rooted sequoia, stable not because storms never came, but because your roots went deeper each time they did. Your presence holds the weight of everything you've walked through. Have you noticed how the room softens when you enter? How noise settles into quiet? That's not intimidation, that's alignment meeting authority. And now the ones who once doubted you, they can feel it too. They see the stillness in your face and mistake it for distance, unaware that it's clarity. It's what happens when someone walks through fire and learns to carry light instead of smoke. You have tested me, and you know me, said the psalmist. Psalm 139:1. Heaven knows the exact cost of your obedience. Do you remember Sofia Marin, a soft-spoken sculptor from Chile? She spent 15 years carving public memorials for people who had lost children without ever charging a single cent. No media, no headlines. Until one day, a grieving mother nominated her for a Peace Award, and her story spread across continents. But Sofia didn't change. She continued her work in silence, saying, "Art should never be louder than compassion." Compare that with Cassian Virelli, a celebrity philanthropist who staged donations and exploited tragedy for image. When the truth surfaced, that funds were diverted and stories falsified, his empire collapsed. The world saw a generous man. Heaven saw manipulation. And what's done in pretense always crumbles under truth. You, on the other hand, moved in integrity when there was no audience. You gave your last seed without demanding a harvest. You became a sanctuary for others without asking to be saved yourself. And now, your name is being written on places where your feet haven't stepped yet. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up. James 4:10. The lifting has begun. Not loud, not immediate, but irreversible. The kind of rising that doesn't fade when the applause ends. The kind of elevation that cannot be explained through metrics or merit, but only through mercy. There's a question you might feel echoing inside now. Why does it feel like everything is simultaneously quiet and sacred? Because this is holy ground. This is the part of your journey where heaven breathes and the earth must respond. Like the Nautilus, which builds new chambers in silence and leaves the old behind, you too are expanding in structure without noise. Or like the snow leopard, rare, resilient, and nearly invisible, your strength doesn't need spectacle. It just needs space. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. 2 Corinthians 4:17. Now, when people ask how you got here, what will you say? That you prayed, that you waited, that you walked alone when no one saw? Or will you simply smile, knowing that the hardest exam you ever faced didn't make you? It revealed you. And what it revealed was holy. But let's be honest, you didn't always feel this way. There were days the silence was louder than your prayers. Days you questioned if you were delusional, if maybe you misread every confirmation, if maybe the calling was just a fantasy stitched together to help you survive the storm. You wondered, what if this was all just in my head? There were nights when you stared at the ceiling in a room that felt too small for the weight of your purpose, and too heavy with pressure to even breathe. No spotlight, no voice from the clouds, just breath and burden. And yet, you kept breathing. You kept inhaling hope, even when you had no proof. That breath, the one you almost lost in exhaustion, is now the very oxygen-making space for the next chapter. Not because your circumstances suddenly changed, but because something inside you did. The breath you protected through panic is now the wind behind your wings. That's not survival. That's sacred resilience. The Spirit of God has made me, and the breath of the Almighty gives me life. Job 33:4. Your lungs became altars. Each inhale was a testimony that the darkness didn't win. And now each exhale carries authority. Can you feel it? The shift isn't just around you, it's within you. Your breath no longer carries survival mode. It carries strategy. It carries intention. It carries presence. The very breath you almost surrendered is now hosting revelation. Just like Joseph, thrown into a pit by those closest to him, forgotten in a prison by those he helped, his breath carried him until the throne could. He didn't demand a crown. He was prepared for it in silence. And when Pharaoh finally called him, Joseph didn't stammer. He stood. Because you don't need rehearsal when heaven has been preparing you behind closed doors. And like trees that grow in alpine solitude, you learned to inhale the thin air of elevation. You learned to metabolize disappointment into discernment. Your roots grew in terrain most wouldn't survive. And now your fruit is undeniable, even if no one claps yet. Have you ever met someone who glowed differently? Not because of what they owned, but because of what they endured, like Nadia Lamar, a former trauma nurse who spent her nights tending to others' worst days, and her mornings learning quantum physics to reimagine healing frequencies. No degree at first, no funding, but now she's built therapeutic programs that merge medicine with frequency-based trauma recovery. She's not loud, but her presence shifts things. Meanwhile, others like Dorian Vell, a once praised startup founder, manipulated his way into boardrooms using charisma but no character. He sabotaged competitors, doctored metrics, and built his empire on borrowed brilliance. And when the truth surfaced, the empire collapsed, not because of enemies, but because integrity was never part of the blueprint. You didn't steal ideas. You stewarded pain. You didn't posture. You persevered. And now God is exhaling through your life, not to make you famous, but to make you fruitful. By your endurance you will gain your lives. Luke 21:19. So breathe, not to survive anymore, but to stretch, to expand, to rise. Because breath is more than biology for you now. It's become sacred currency. Every inhale is backed by endurance. Every exhale echoes authority. You're no longer just breathing to exist. You're breathing to build. Your breath is no longer just sustaining life. It's carrying revelation. What used to feel like survival is now creative power. It's becoming blueprints, strategies, and alignment. And the more you stay present with it, the more you realize you are not who you were when the exam began. The Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. Genesis 2:7. The breath in you now is not just divine in origin, it's divine in direction. It has been tested through darkness and hasn't expired. It's been filtered through pain and hasn't weakened. What kind of strength is that? The kind God only gives to those he trusts to not waste it. Do you notice how your voice has changed lately? It's calmer but heavier, not with anxiety, but with spiritual density. You don't need to shout anymore. People hear you now, not because of volume, but because of vibration. You've become a tuning fork for those still living out of tune. Just like in physics, where resonance amplifies only when frequencies align, your spirit is now resonating with purpose. The rooms that used to ignore you are suddenly silent when you speak. Why? Because you've passed the test, and now your frequency is calibrated for influence. Let your words be few, but full of grace, seasoned with salt. Colossians 4:6. And you've learned the value of that. You've learned that spiritual weight doesn't mean constant motion. It means consistent alignment. There's power in not chasing. There's wisdom in stillness, because now you're moving differently, not to prove, but to protect, not to strive, but to steward. People sense the shift, but can't name it. You walk into a space and they pause. Some are inspired, some are intimidated. That's okay. Even Jesus, when he returned to his hometown, was met not with celebration, but with skepticism. A prophet is not without honor, except in his hometown. Mark 6:4. You know who else was misunderstood for a long season? Camila Ortega, a reclusive sculptor from South America. For over a decade she lived in obscurity, carving works that no one commissioned, often trading food for tools. She didn't chase galleries, but now her sculptures, pieces infused with silence, resilience and vision, stand in sacred spaces around the world. Why? Because time caught up to the frequency she'd been carving in solitude. Not everyone recognizes what they see when it's still being formed, but once it's revealed, it can't be unseen. Contrast that with Malik Troyan, a charismatic wellness guru who promised spiritual acceleration through shortcuts and spectacle. He mocked waiting, skipped depth, and monetized illusion. But when trials came, his community collapsed. The structures looked strong, but the spirit wasn't stable. Why? Because he cheated the test. And the consequence of passing the wrong way is always exposure. You didn't cheat, you didn't collapse. You carried the weight when no one validated it. You listened when heaven went quiet. And now you've earned your seat, not at a table of trends, but at a table of truth. Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life. James 1:12. So what's next for someone like you? You breathe and begin again, but this time from authority. You build, but this time from identity. You serve, but not to be seen, only to release what's already overflowing. Because when heaven promotes you, you don't carry titles, you carry presence. And if you're still wondering whether it's really happening, check your breath. Is it steady now? Is it peaceful where panic used to live? Then the shift isn't coming. It's already begun. There's a new strength forming in you, one that defies gravity. It's not loud or flashy. It doesn't come from grinding your teeth or surviving chaos with a hardened heart. It's weightless in form, but massive in substance. This strength was born in the very moments you thought were empty, useless, wasted. Not the kind of strength that screams for attention, but the kind that knows its value even when no one's watching. It doesn't demand proof. It is the proof. It's what forms in a soul that no longer begs for peace by avoiding storms, but finds it by building shelter inside one. You're no longer bargaining for relief. You're learning resonance, how to vibrate peace at a frequency higher than panic. You're learning what the eagle knows instinctively, that when the storm comes, you don't flee, you rise above it. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. Isaiah 40:31. You've stopped asking, why me? Because somewhere in the silence between your heartbeats, you realized this wasn't punishment. It was positioning. You weren't being punished with weight. You were being trusted with it. Because God doesn't hand out light paths to heavy callings. To whom much is given, much will be required. Luke 12:48. That's the mathematics of heaven. What if your long season of suffering was actually God's way of strengthening your spiritual ligaments, building your endurance, not your ego? What if that breakdown wasn't a punishment, but a recalibration, a holy rebalancing of what you thought was necessary? Mendel, a young architect who left a prestigious firm when no one believed in her concept of sacred space design, spaces that healed emotionally as much as they functioned structurally. She spent years in obscurity, mocked for her quiet vision. Now, hospitals, churches, and shelters around the globe use her blueprints, structures infused with light flow and psychological renewal. Her silence built what shouting never could. Meanwhile, Bruno Kael, once hailed as a visionary biotech investor, rushed results, cut ethical corners, and built momentum on manipulation. His empire grew fast and fell faster. Investigations revealed falsified data, public trust collapsed, and the lives harmed were real. That's what happens when you force divine timing and fail the test by copying the world's methods. You didn't do that. You didn't fold when the room got dark. You didn't counterfeit your calling. You learned to carry mystery like a torch, not a burden. You've discovered the holy art of quiet strength, the kind Jesus carried when he stood silent before Pilate. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Isaiah 53:7. That's not weakness, that's supreme control. What you're carrying now is the kind of strength that doesn't live in your muscles. It lives in your frequency, in the way your presence disarms rooms, in the way your discernment shifts atmospheres. That strength is magnetic, not performative. It doesn't need a stage. It carries its own gravity. And in nature, even the bamboo tree teaches this. It spends its first 5 years growing underground, invisible to the eye, while its roots expand wide and deep. Then, suddenly, in just weeks, it shoots up over 80 feet. Why? Because unseen growth is the most stable kind. And that's what you've been doing, rooting, quietly, deeply, relentlessly. We also glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope. Romans 5:3-4. Now, your spiritual signature has changed. Your steps are no longer shaky. Your heart no longer pleads for understanding. It knows what it is. It carries a frequency of quiet confidence because the exam was never about what you could earn. It was about what you could endure without losing your essence. And here's what you may not have realized. People see it now. Even if they can't name it, they feel it. They pause when you speak. They trust your silence. They seek your presence, not because you're perfect, but because you become safe. You become real. You become tested. So what are you called to now? Not to prove you're strong, but to walk like it, to breathe like it, to lead without force and speak without striving, because what's coming next will not require more effort. It will require more alignment. And you're ready. Just ask Maribel Reyes, a single mother from a quiet village who spent years working double shifts at a textile factory, all while caring for her bedridden father and raising 2 children on her own. No one clapped when she showed up every morning with swollen feet and sleepless eyes, but in the hidden places of her life, something sacred was forming. Resilience refined through routine, grace carried in silence. Today, her daughters have both become nurses, not because they were told how to care, but because they watched care embodied. Maribel never preached strength. She lived it. She wasn't given a platform, but she became one. Now something sacred is unfolding. You don't need to chase it. It's not running from you. In fact, it's moving toward you now, slowly, confidently, unmistakably, like a sunrise that doesn't need an announcement to make the world brighter. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus 14:14. You passed, and now you've been promoted in silence. And with that promotion comes a new responsibility. This is where the chosen become leaders. Not by title, not by platform, but by presence. You carry a vibration now that speaks before you say a word. You walk into places and shift things simply by standing in your truth. That's not ego. That's earned. How do you lead when no one gave you permission, but heaven already gave you authority? It's the kind of presence that reminds others of something ancient, something they've forgotten about themselves. You're not just someone who overcame, you're someone who transmits, like the way a tuning fork sets off vibrations in another instrument across the room. Your inner alignment now causes things to resonate around you. What changed? Not the volume of your voice, but the frequency of your soul. You see it in people like Brian Stevenson, the lawyer and author behind the Equal Justice Initiative. He doesn't speak to impress, he speaks to convict hearts, with calmness, with compassion, with unwavering conviction. What gives his voice weight isn't just his Harvard degree, it's the years he spent showing up for those no one wanted to see. Brian never needed a stage to walk in power. His presence is the authority. Compare that with Jeffrey Skilling, once the CEO of Enron, who walked in false confidence, a man who carried title but not truth, platform but not principle. He made decisions that manipulated lives and markets for personal gain. The collapse came fast, but the loss of trust lasted longer than any sentence. Leadership without integrity is an illusion, and illusions always crumble under time. And then there's Nora, a school janitor in her 60s who knows the name of every child she passes. No degree, no fame, no influence by worldly standards. But when grief hit the school last year, it was Nora's silent presence, her warm hands and her whispered prayers that steadied an entire hallway of crying students. She didn't preach healing, she became it. Whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. Matthew 20:26. Like an old redwood standing firm through decades of storms, you don't need to push anymore to be powerful. You just need to remain rooted. A redwood doesn't demand attention. Its silence is its authority. Its height tells the story of its endurance. What if your stillness is more disruptive to darkness than any loud declaration? The spirit inside you has shifted from echo to origin. You're not mirroring anymore. You're initiating, and the reason you're not exhausted like before is because you're no longer leaking energy where it's not respected. You've learned what engineers call load distribution, how to shift weight strategically so nothing breaks under pressure. You've stopped carrying things that were never yours to hold. And that's why you're standing taller now. You've also become discerning in ways that psychology calls pattern disruption. You're no longer repeating the cycles that drained your predecessors. When chaos comes knocking, you don't invite it in. You let it knock, and keep your peace locked on the inside. There's something holy about that. Do you feel it? That quiet clarity where confusion used to live. You're not just a survivor of the wilderness. You're the one who mapped a path through it so others won't have to get lost. The evidence of your spiritual exam isn't just your strength, it's your stillness. In quietness and confidence shall be your strength. Isaiah 30:15. This is the rise of the chosen who carries sacred influence, not loud, not flashy, but undeniable. The ones who understand now that leadership doesn't begin when the crowd shows up. It begins when you can stand in an empty room, feel God whisper in your chest and respond, "I'm still here," because that's what he was waiting for all along. But here's the most beautiful part. You're not just called to rise, you're called to reach back. Because now you understand what it feels like to be on the edge, to be holding on by a thread, to be doing everything right and still wondering if you've been forgotten. And that understanding is a gift. It gives you eyes that see beyond the surface. It gives you words that heal without trying. It gives you compassion that feels like oxygen to someone else drowning. You don't need a stage to teach. You don't need a crowd to lead. Your life is already speaking. Every scar, every silence, every yes whispered in the dark has become a light someone else can follow. And that's exactly why God allowed the test to be so personal, so that your testimony would never be performative. Now, when someone stands where you once stood, you don't offer advice. You offer presence. You don't need to fix them. You know how to sit in the ache because you've survived it. And from that place of divine empathy, a new form of leadership is born, not built on charisma, but on credibility, not on command, but on communion. You've become a living echo of 2 Corinthians 1:4. God comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. Your survival has become someone else's blueprint. Your restraint has become someone else's permission to breathe. You're no longer reaching back with pity, you're reaching back with clarity, because you know now that people don't just need to be saved. Sometimes they just need to be seen. What if that's why you went through it? What if you were never being punished? You were being prepared to carry what fragile hearts couldn't. Because the truth is, you don't need to fix the world. You just need to be the proof that healing is real. And in case you're still wondering if it mattered, it did. Not just to you, not just to the ones you quietly helped along the way, but to heaven, because your endurance created a ripple, a frequency in the spirit realm, the kind that doesn't fade but multiplies. You didn't just survive your wilderness, you sanctified it, you made it holy ground, and now others will walk more safely because of the path you carved in silence. Isaiah 58:10 says, "If you spend yourselves in behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness." That is no longer a promise. It is now your reality. That's why your presence doesn't go unnoticed anymore. Even if you don't speak, people feel a resonance, a kind of sacred gravity, like when deep roots hold a tree steady in a storm. You are no longer merely visible. You are vital. You are no longer just a person in the room. You are the alignment that keeps the room from falling apart. Have you noticed how people pause when you pause? How your silence now carries more than their shouting ever did? It's not mystique, it's memory, spiritual memory, the kind of soul weight that only comes from walking through fire without letting it burn your love away. It's your stillness. That stillness is what the world has been aching for. A calm that isn't born from escape, but from embodiment. A peace that isn't avoidance, but authority. And you carry it, not because you memorized how, but because you lived it. A forest after rain smells richer, holds more life. That's what's happening in you. The storm passed, but it watered your roots, and now you're carrying fruit no one saw planted. Some will try to understand this version of you using their old language, old frameworks, old expectations. But you're not just a better version of yourself. You've become something new entirely, a new creation. As 2 Corinthians 5:17 affirms, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has gone, the new is here. So you don't owe explanations. You owe obedience. Let them wonder why your steps are heavier with peace, why your words land deeper, why your very presence seems to tune the frequency in a room. It's because you're not just healed, you're assigned. You're not just stable, you're sent. And those who truly carry the mantle of the chosen, they don't go back to prove they passed. They go forward to plant what couldn't grow in old soil. This is your next assignment. Not to convince the world, but to continue walking like someone who's been trusted by heaven itself. Because you have. And the evidence is already showing. You are no longer the one being tested. You are now the one trusted to guide. So don't downplay what you've survived. Don't shrink what you carry just because others didn't see the fire. The fire wasn't meant for them. It was meant to reveal you. You've earned this moment, not through noise, but through nobility. And now it begins. Everything that once confused you is about to clarify. Everything that once felt delayed is about to arrive. Not as a reward, but as a reflection of who you are, of what you've proven, and of what you're here to do next. Because you, chosen one, were given the hardest exam. And not only did you pass, you passed without cheating. And now, heaven is unveiling the real reason for the storm. It wasn't just to prove your endurance, it was to shape your discernment, to make you into someone who doesn't just carry light, but also knows how to guard it. The prophet Jeremiah once wrote, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart." Jeremiah 1:5. That's not just poetry, it's placement. You were not just seen by God, you were set apart. And now the separation you once resented is becoming the sanctification you operate from. What if the silence was training your ears to hear frequency, not volume? What if the delay was fine-tuning your timing, not punishing your desire? What if everything hidden in private was God's way of building a foundation strong enough for what the public will never see? Jesus led. He didn't begin with crowds. He began in the wilderness. The Son of God passed his own divine exam, not by defeating enemies in public, but by resisting temptation in private. Matthew 4:1-11. And when Satan offered shortcuts to glory, he refused, just like you did. And when others chose influence over integrity, the results always told the truth. Take Carlos Ghosn, once the celebrated CEO of Renault Nissan. He had power, prestige, and global recognition, but in the face of scrutiny, deception was exposed. The house he built on performance collapsed under the weight of hidden corruption. When the test came, truth was not in him, and the fall was public, devastating, and permanent. Contrast that with someone like Fatima, a nurse in a remote mountain village who stayed through landslides and famine. No media, no reward, just one life at a time, one patient at a time. She gave blood when supplies ran out. She carried elderly villagers down rocky hills to shelter. Her story will never be printed in textbooks, but heaven sees every chapter. She passed in silence, and because of her, generations now live. And when you walk now, it's not with ego, it's with earned grace. Like a deer navigating dense forest terrain with fluid confidence, you've learned to move with instinct and elegance through environments filled with uncertainty and noise. You're not easily startled anymore. You pause, you listen, you adapt. Your presence calms others because you've mastered the terrain that once confused you. You've learned to vibrate at a frequency where truth cuts through performance. You don't speak to be heard anymore. You speak to carry healing. And when you don't speak, your stillness still carries instruction. As Proverbs 17:27 says, "The one who has knowledge uses words with restraint, and whoever has understanding is even-tempered." Your strength no longer looks like resistance. It looks like resonance. You don't explain your energy. You embody it. You are no longer trying to earn the room. You are the room. As Romans 5:3-4 says, "We glory in tribulations also, knowing that tribulation worketh patience, and patience experience, and experience hope." You've lived that formula in reverse. And now hope isn't just an idea, it's your identity. But here's the question few ever dare to ask themselves. What if the very pressure you hated was the birthplace of the wisdom they now envy? This is what it means to be chosen, to be tested quietly, to be trusted fully, and to now walk not with weight, but with witness. Chosen one, the test you went through wasn't about proving your strength to God. It was about revealing your strength to yourself. God already knew you had what it takes, but you didn't. Not until the pain pressed you. Not until the silence stretched you. And now you stand on the other side. Not perfect, not unscarred, but pure. You didn't cheat. You didn't run. You didn't compromise your soul to make the pressure easier. And heaven is smiling because you passed the hardest exam, with your integrity still intact. Your test wasn't graded by human applause, timelines, or results. It was graded by obedience. You kept going when others gave up. You didn't lie, manipulate, or sell your purpose for comfort. You chose the narrow road. And now God is unlocking a door only the faithful can walk through. Others saw delay, but God saw discipline. Others saw you struggle, but God saw you submit. And now favor follows you, not because you forced it, but because you qualified for it. If this message resonated, I want to thank you for walking this journey with me. There's something powerful about hearing a word that speaks to what you've lived but couldn't explain. It's a sign that God hasn't just been watching. He's been walking with you, and now He's confirming that you're not behind. You're being prepared for visibility, authority, and release. Thank you so much for taking this journey with me. If this message touched you in any way, please like it as a sign of agreement. Share it with someone who's quietly enduring their own test right now. Someone who might not know they're passing even as they suffer. Comment below with a declaration like, "I passed the test, and I kept my soul." And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another word meant for your next chapter. To those of you who have supported this space through super thanks, I see you, and I'm deeply honored. Your generosity helps keep this message flowing to others who need it. And even if you've never given a dime, your presence here, your attention, your openness, that means more than words can say. Whether you sow financially, spiritually, or silently, know this. Heaven counts it all as seed. Your awakening doesn't end here. Continue your journey by choosing one of the videos now appearing on your screen. Follow the one your spirit is drawn to. Each message is prepared with prayer and purpose, and it may hold the next key you've been waiting for. None of this is random, and neither are you. May God bless you for every silent yes you gave when no one else saw. May your reward be public because your obedience was private. May you walk in rooms your humility has already paid for, and may you continue to pass every future test, not just with excellence, but with honor. I'll see you in the next video.